The Ravenous Host has been released in its entirety now for us. We get to see the whole entire roster reveal of the Skaven today. They did all sorts of greatness here with the roster, with a couple things missing out, of course, as to be expected with a lot of the rosters so far, like, Shadow Warriors with the High Elves, and the Beastmasters and a number of other units as well with the Dark Elves. But now, and Lizardmen as well. I didn't forget those guys. But coming into the Skaven roster here, we've heard finally some confirmation of who the legendary lords will be. We've gotten that from a lot of the embargo being lifted yesterday. We've got who the lords are, who the heroes are, and everything, and all the infantry and missile infantry, as well as the monsters. So today we're just going to go through those here real quick. Go over the notes from the video. I posted them all up on the subreddit for y'all. And then we'll go over kind of some of the stuff that's missing that they didn't touch on, or they didn't even mention, at least. So at least you can see what they are. And just as another point of fact, at the end of this video will be a link to the entire Skaven Lore video, so you can delve in deep on all of that. You've got the opportunity to hear about the lore of each one of these lords, each one of these Grayseer, or each one of these, sorry, read the word Grayseer, each one of these units, special, rare, and core alike. And get a really good idea for how the Skaven are really structured. So they kind of did a little quick intro on the Skaven as a whole here, but they're all hopped up on Warpstone. Warpstone, of course, comes from Morsleib, the giant moon that hangs above Malice, which is the name of the Warhammer world. And in funny point of fact, in the end times, they actually bring Morsleib down onto the Warhammer world because, fuck it, Skaven are crazy like that. But they kind of have a World War I kind of technology feel to them, right? Where they just they've got all these big, huge artillery pieces. They've got all this chemical warfare. They've got all these exotic, weird, newly invented, stupid guns. They've got all these different types of technology, all this different type of technology, mainly from Clan Scryer. But they have two really cool abilities. They've got strength in numbers. That allows them to work better the more and this really pertains mainly to people like the Skaven slaves, the clan rats, but they work better with more Skaven around. So just like martial prowess and murderous prowess, and what we've seen with the rampage mechanic of Lizardmen, the Skaven have their own faction-specific mechanic as well. And we've seen this too with the newly released Norska. Norska has their whole rage mechanic and their berserk mechanic. So it's really interesting to see how Creative Assembly has added a little more flavor rather than just different skins of a generic type of unit, and also different kind of somewhat stat lines. But rather than, okay, every class having or every race having spearmen, here's spearmen with their additional trait, what makes them so flavorful to that army, which is very awesome. I mean, every single army in Total War Warhammer, I'm sorry, in the tabletop has that kind of mechanic, so it's cool to see this, especially these armies as well, because Skaven, Lizardmen, Dark Elves, and High Elves have something that makes them characteristic per unit, whereas the Empire doesn't have as crazy of a special underlying rule. They just kind of are very more kit friendly and the such. That's what makes a lot of these I don't want to say not humanoid because they're definitely humanoid, but not human races kind of stand apart. Even when you take a look at dwarves don't use magic. They don't have the winds of magic. They just use their runes. So everyone kind of has that kind of little crux about their army. But the whole army itself is very fast and quite mobile on the battlefield. And we've seen that from a lot of the videos, from Party Elite or from, I almost said Turn, but I know he didn't go because he's an asshole, or Indie Pride. A lot of them have released these videos on that showcase how fast the Skaven are going to move across the battlefield, which is really, really cool. And really, it's kind of terrifying, to be totally honest. You play this game on tabletop and yeah, sure, it's just you're using a lot of your imagination and you're reading all these things, but to actually see it put to motion in a game like Total War Warhammer with the graphics level of Total War Warhammer is pretty insane. That's the way they just kind of scurry across the battlefield and just, there was one video I think that it was either Indie Pride or even Eurogamer had up where it was just like 2 units of High Elf Spearmen, and they just Skaven swarmed around them, getting like hacked to pieces. But that's kind of the role of Skaven. But it was amazing to see. So super stoked on this game coming out here in September. But we did find out that there's going to be Clan Moors and Clan Pestilence. They did talk a little bit about that. Clan Pestilence, of course, being founded and based out of Lustria. And after the Skaven are exposed to more and more diseases fighting with the lizardmen, Nurglich kind of says, hey, let's just take all these diseases like the yellow pox and start going hog wild on people. So the two legendary lords we've seen in a lot of the videos so far is Lord Skrolk and Queek Headtaker. So Lord Skrolk is going to be your casting lord. He's going to have the lore of plagues, so giant plagues on the battlefield and imbuing of poison, so giving the ability of poison attacks, hopefully. But very defensive until he gets his items, is what they were saying. And no mount choices for Skrolk as well. And with Queek Headtaker, no mount choices as well, but also is our melee lord, specialist, kind of it's a duelist lord, so he's going to get up close and personal. And he's the head of Clan Moor. Well, not really the head of Clan Moors. That was kind of a typo on my part, but he's going to be your lord for Clan Moors. From a lore perspective, he is not. But he's very brave and very strong, as they were saying. They were saying it's like the 3 Bs, bravery, brutality, and brevity. I don't remember what the other one was, but he's going to be a pretty strong lord and very, very, very offensive. So every lord is really, every single faction's got that one very offensive lord. And I mean, if you took a look at Tyrion's stat line, he's got like 120 armor. He's got like 475 magic and flaming attacks. Like, the guy is just a fucking monster. So it's really interesting to see what we're going to have a Queek Headtaker here. Now, the other lords that we have access to are the Grey Seer and the Warlord. The Grey Seer is your normal kind of caster lord, but it's going to have the ability to be mounted on a screaming bell, which we saw in the intro in-engine trailer for the Skaven. The screaming bell makes him a lot more durable since it's a chariot more or less, and it invigorates the Skaven around it. So it's going to allow them to kind of fight a little bit harder, a little bit better, a little better leadership, but it's going to have a bound spell that deals damage. Maybe on the same lines as the Luminarch. They didn't really kind of go into that, but just like all Skaven things, the bell has a chance to backfire, and if it does, the bell explodes. So that's going to be, we hear about this in the Plague Furnace as well. So, and I hope we get that with the Warp Lightning Cannon, and not to say that it kind of curbs their OP-edness, quote unquote. It just makes it so that they're more true to form. The Skaven are extremely random and extremely prone to having these backfires and these random occurrences. There's something explodes and all the little guys chitter and die away. But so that's the Grey Seer here. That's our caster lord. We got the Warlord here as well. And one thing to mention, Lord Skrolk does have access to the lore of plagues, like I've mentioned. Well, I guess I'm kind of getting ahead of myself, but they haven't mentioned the lore of ruin just yet, and we'll talk about that more in the Warlock Engineer. But the Warlord, he has the ability to mount a Rat Ogre Bonebreaker, which is amazing. The Bonebreaker was not a tabletop figure. It was only released through Forge World, which is basically, think of it this way. Games Workshop makes all of its products and all of its models for Warhammer, Warhammer 40k, Lord of the Rings, etc., etc. But Forge World was kind of like their specialty house that said, hey, we didn't get a chance to make this mold. How about you guys do it? And they would make these really great, really detailed models for a lot of factions that didn't have models in their standard book. So the Bonebreaker was not in the standard roster. The Forge World made it separately. So the Bonebreaker is actually a Rat Ogre that a Warlord is going to be on top of. So it's really exciting because the Warlord itself is a melee sword and shield type lord, really generic lord here. Nothing special about him, but the fact that he can ride a Bonebreaker is pretty damn cool. Now we're getting into the heroes here. They didn't explicitly call them heroes in the video, but now that I've looked at the Skaven army roster, I can see that they are the actual heroes. So we've got the Assassin, which is going to be your stealthy unit, of course. It's going to have a backstab capability. And it's going to have a really, really good sneak as well, like a 30 to 40 meter ability to hide, like within 30 to 40 meters. They won't be able to reveal them, is what I'm trying to say. And they've got these little concealing bombs as well, so they can get in there, backstab, run away, pop a concealing bomb, and they're stalking away. So really amazing little unit, because it's also going to have its Skaven brew mechanic that makes the Assassin more offensive but lowers its defense as well. So it's really an all melee type of character. And we've seen the same thing with the Dark Elf Assassin. So it's really interesting that we've got these guys in here as well. And I'm really excited because I've talked a lot about how they might be doing assassins. Because in the books, they're often seen as lords, but they cannot be the actual leader of the army, so it makes a lot of sense that they've been placed in the hero slot. The Warlock Engineer, as we've kind of touched on, is a mix of magic and engineering, right? So it's a bit more of a supporting lord. It has a halberd with a Doom Rocket, and the Doom Rocket is a one-shot AoE nuke, quote-unquote. He said the word nuke. I'm wondering how how decimating that word nuke is really in this, but he's an AP unit with spells. He's got access. He did not explicitly say access to the Lore of Ruin. That is conjecture from me, but in the tabletop, that's the lore he has. He would not have the Lore of Plague if they decided to make that. So that's if they decided to do that, it'd be just kind of out of left field. I wouldn't have expected that. But the Lore of Ruin, it's got like chain lightning spells and like skitter leap and stuff like that. So stuff that's a little bit more Skaven-y and less plaguey. But the Warlock Engineer is going to amplify explosive stuff around him. So I don't know if that means that maybe the Plague Furnace or the Warp Fire Thrower or Poison Wind Globadiers and Death Globe Globadiers will have more damage, kind of like a Dwarf Engineer, or what that really means as a whole. So I'm curious to see what that explosive amplification really entails, and if you are some of the streamers that have already seen the Warlock Engineer in action, or you guys have seen from some of their videos and I just haven't caught it, please feel free to comment. Let me know. I always like to make sure that these videos are as accurate as possible. I tend to get pretty excited though, and sometimes I forget things. So I'm always open to being corrected. So we've got the Plague Priest then after that, and this is going to be your pure caster lord. So Assassin was melee, Warlock, I'm sorry, not lord, hero. Assassin was melee, Warlock Engineer was support, and your Plague Priest is pure caster. So it's going to have a Plague Sensor, which is an AP two-handed weapon, and the sensor is going to have a leadership debuff of the things that it hits. So like Sunder Armor, you know, that's going to lower their armor. The Plague Sensor will lower their leadership, which is a really cool mechanic because we see this a lot across the Skaven roster. And the Plague Priest itself is going to have an aura of damage around it, and that can actually backfire as well. Just like the the Plague Furnace is going to have an aura of damage around it that can backfire just like the bell, because the Plague Priest can be mounted on a Plague Furnace. So you've got there's 3 mount options. The Grey Seer can mount a Screaming Bell, the Warlord can mount a Bonebreaker, and the Plague Priest can mount a Plague Furnace. So it's really exciting here because we don't have the conventional mounts. I mean, one of them is a Rat Ogre. So we have a bit of a different mechanic here with Skaven, that we're not going to get the typical infantry cavalry line that we've seen in not just in Total War Warhammer 1, but in Total War. Like you look at the Roman style of fighting, where it's like you've got your Roman legionnaires followed by your auxiliaries on the left and right flanks that consist of cavalry, and your skirmishers that kind of come in and out of the front. That's the typical like kind of fighting block, or maybe even archers with a backline. You're not going to see that as much with Skaven here. You're going to have a lot of massed infantry and a lot of massed firing that maybe isn't so accurate, but it is massed nonetheless. Which gets me to my next point, melee infantry. So we're starting in on the Skaven slaves here. There's a lot of variants. So we can have the Skaven slaves with spears or with slingers. So you're basically saying, are they going to be with a sword? Are they going to be anti-large? Or are they going to just be ranged? But they're cheap, they're voluminous, they're more of the meat shield, right? They're low morale. So you want to use them to, a good example they used, and I know I'm probably actually going to repeat it on accident, is Poison Wind Globadiers behind Skaven slaves, just chucking the globes over them. So you want to use them to muck up the front line, catch things out of place, so you can use other creatures, other units to better attack the enemy. So it's really fun because that's exactly how they're supposed to be used. Tabletop Skaven slaves, you just chuck down the line. The zombies in this game are really slow, just like they are in the tabletop. So it's hard to use zombies like an effective tar pit like you can Skaven slaves. Skaven slaves and zombies are two like the prime tar pit units in the tabletop as well as Total Warhammer world. But moving away as well from this Skaven slaves part that I missed out here is they're not really useful on their own, right? They need the rest of the army to be beneficial, like I was just saying. So they have a high volume of missiles that they can shoot from their slingers. They can't move and shoot, but they can keep whipping those things out, and they have a high arc as well. So you might not do the most damage, but you might be constantly pouring damage on. So that might, if with enough Skaven slaves with slingers, it might be enough to kind of turn maybe a monstrous beast away or something of the sort. But they do have those two abilities I was talking about, strength in numbers. They work better with other Skaven slaves around, and scurry away, which we haven't touched on as much yet. And what this does is as they route, they get faster. So they're even harder to catch when they're running away. So they have the chance to kind of come back and forth, come back and forth, come back and forth. So it's interesting to see an army that's based along the mechanic of fleeing, which, you know, for most armies, once you get like 50%, 60% of your line starts to break, it's just it's cascading effect, and there goes the whole line. But in this army, routing is almost a tactical advantage depending on the scenario. Like, let's say all your Skaven slaves engage in the front, they get low morale just as your Storm Vermin are filling in the gaps, and boom, they run away. Storm Vermin enter through where the Skaven slaves were, lock up that front line. Skaven slaves rally as they've now run away. They come behind. So now you've got a flanking debuff to leadership as well. So there's a lot of cool ways you can use Skaven slaves, as you can see here. So moving from the Skaven slaves, you've got the really kind of standard infantry unit of the Skaven in the clan rats. The clan rats can have spears, they can have shields, they can have spears and shields, they have swords and shields. So there's 4 variants of them as well. But they're about as strong as Empire swords, and they were saying, they're quite a bit stronger than the Skaven slaves. In tabletop, the Skaven slaves are very shitty. Just not good when it comes to actually attacking. They have a 2-weapon skill. The clan rat has got 3-weapon skill, which isn't excellent, but it's about on par with a lot of just chaff type infantry. So at least it kind of is slightly lower rather than being really, really low, such as the Skaven slave. So that's your clan rat there, your kind of standard infantry unit. Now, moving into another one I just mentioned, we have the Storm Vermin, and they have the access to their typical halberds, which they've always had access to. That's a tabletop kind of staple, but way, way back, like 3rd edition or 2nd edition, Storm Vermin used to actually be able to carry a sword and shield. So they will have this option as well. So you can have an elite infantry unit that is heavily armored. It's the only heavily armored mainline unit of the Skaven roster, period. That's tabletop and Total Warhammer true. And they have high leadership too for a unit, or for an army that does not benefit from that. They have high leadership, or I'm sorry, that is not common. They have high leadership. They're also weirdly expensive. That's what he was saying, that those are the exact words he used. So it leads me to believe that you're not going to be able to field as many of them, but when they are fielded, as long as they're in conjunction with the rest of the mechanics of your army, they're going to be quite effective. Because they're still a very large unit. All these units are very large. I think we're seeing Skaven slaves that marked at 180 on a large unit count, which is, I believe, the largest unit in the Total War Warhammer world. And it's the same thing with clan rats and storm vermin. We're going to see large blocks of infantry here. So they're going to fall in line with that Skaven kind of voluminous horde type Tyranid mechanic that we've seen from, like, Tyranid being a race from 40k. So it's Zerg mechanic would be a good one. That's a common vernacular. But you've got again a very ravenous horde like army. But the halberds will give them AP and anti-large as well. So that's the little bit on your elite infantry with the storm vermin. But we've got the plague monks now. And the plague monks have 2 varieties, 2 flavors as it were. They don't wear any armor, so they don't really feel pain, is what they said. So that maybe makes me think that it might be a melee resistance mechanic built into their profile as a default, but they are frenzied. So the normal monks will have 2 swords, making them anti-infantry. Kind of helps even the odds when it comes to chaff battles, because you don't want to. It's going to be pretty boring to see just goblin spearmen versus Skaven rats, or Skaven clan rats, I mean, versus just skeletons or zombies. At least with the plague monks, you can kind of chew that up a little bit and get to the meat of both armies. But they have pretty decent leadership as well, and their Sensorbearers, which is the alternate option for them, is going to be AP plus lowering that leadership, just like the Plague Priest has access to. But they're going to be very fast as well. They said they were 8 speed faster than normal heavy infantry, so they're quite quick for their use case, I guess you could say. And it fits in, again, to the theme of the army. Now, here's a unit that is not in tabletop. It's Creative Assembly exclusive. It's called a Death Runner. It's going to have a Weeping Blade, which is a magic item from the actual tabletop army book, which is awesome. But they're going to eat up armor. They're not standard Sundering either. So Sundering confers a -30 to armor. This is going to half the armor of the unit it hits. So we're talking about Tyrion at 120 armor. Boom, you hit him with this. That's a half armor. And I'm assuming that poison and thunder and all that kind of stuff is going to stack into it too. So, I mean, it makes Tyrion a lot more accessible to kill, right? It's a commando type unit. They're going to be fast, stealthy. They're going to have concealing smoke bombs. So basically it's an assassin as a unit. And they didn't really say how large it is, but they said it's going to be able to jump back and forth from enemy to enemy. That's a verbatim there. So there's an ability, a spell that the Lore of Ruin has called Skitter Leap we've talked about. It makes me wonder, are they going to add Skitter Leap in as an ability, or are we going to see these guys have Skitter Leap? So I'm really, really interested to see how that works out, because the ability to jump back and forth from enemy to enemy is awesome. Just to have them kind of shoot around, if it's through a spell, or if they're just talking about the concealing bomb, giving them the ease of access around the battlefield. So that's a little bit of a conjecture there, and I'm really kind of curious to see what happens, but that's my brainchild on it. So it's a little bit of a force multiplier. So that's the melee infantry. Let's jump into the missile infantry here. So we've got night runners with slings. So your night runners are your they're less than the gutter runners. The night runners are the not the elite version, but they're their kind of basic runner unit, because there's 3 runners they've added here: night, death, and gutter. But the basic night runner, the no sling, has got throwing stars. So then they can be shot while running. So that's pretty awesome, because they're a vanguard unit, and they have the same dodge mechanic that witch elves have. But they're fewer than clan rats, but still fairly good in melee. So they have a really good, nice high arch with their slings as well. So it can fire over units. It can fire onto walls. So you have a pretty cool little missile infantry here with the night runners. Now jumping away from night runners, the last runner unit, we've got gutter runners. Now gutter runners have 4 variants. Normal, I'm going to say melee, or not melee. Well, yeah, I guess it's kind of melee. Throwing stars / melee. Throwing stars / melee with poison. Slings with poison. So you've got 4 variants here. They have vanguard and stock that the night runners don't have. They're better at throwing their throwing stars, and they're quite expensive. But it has a bit of cavalry. They can slow down cavalry significantly from the poison as well. So they can continue to kind of skirmish around since they're already so quick on their feet. They also have a snare net ability, which is true to form, which is amazing. Like, I love how the Skaven have stayed very kind of by the book, and quite literally by the tabletop book. So it's been really awesome to see that here. But their snare net won't work like a net of Amontauk. It's not going to stop you outright, but it will vastly lower your speed. And they can outrun demogryphs and continue to poison star them as well. So they can, he was saying that a unit of gutter runners with poison can just, not tank, but what's it called? Kite a demogryph unit all the way across the map if it wants, and win. So that's pretty amazing to me. So those are our 2 kind of conventional archery type missile infantry. Now we have a warp fire thrower, and this is going to be similar to the Drake gun teams we've seen already in the dwarf line, right? So smaller teams, very specific use cases. So the warp fire lowers leadership. It's got fire and magical attack, so no AP, and does explosive damage. So this thing is going to work wonders against, say, stuff like the vampire counts. It's going to be really good against greenskins or beastmen. So especially with the lowering of the leadership, it's going to be a really, really strong use. But then, what if you're not up against those 3 armies? What if you're up against them a little bit more AP heavy? Well, that's why you have the Poison Wind Globadiers coming in here. They throw globes that are anti-large and AP. So it's a tiny unit again, small weapon team, low armor. And it's pretty risky to field them. A spell or a cavalry charge will wipe them out. But you can use Skaven Slaves as a screen, like I was saying earlier, and they literally evaporate units. So you have the ability to throw this against large creatures. So your mammoth coming at you, boom, hit it with this. It says evaporate, so I'm not sure how quick that works. But a unit of trolls, crypt horrors, some minotaurs, it's going to work really well against them. But then you've got also the death globe bombardiers, and these guys aren't a unit from the book. There's like a mention of a death globe, so they talk about that a little bit in the book and say like, hey, this is what it would be like. So they said, well, fuck it, let's make a unit out of it. So the more explosive version of the Poison Wind's warp dust that's in their little globes that they chuck, this covers a larger area and it's AP. So you'd use the Poison Wind against large units, and you'd use the death globe against a targeted unit, like say an actual unit of Chosen. They would eat up a unit of Chosen. But that's our missile infantry here, and we'll round out with our monstrous infantry, then talk about some of the things that we unfortunately didn't see in the roster here. So, monstrous infantry, we've got the rat ogres, and they don't have the strength and number ability that the rest of the Skaven do, but they're still going to be quite beastly on their own. They're faster than trolls, but slower than a lot of the other Skaven. But they have a high charge bonus, so they're going to be kind of like your cavalry unit. They're not meant for perpetual combat. That's not the role they fill. So they're kind of like skin wolves. How skin wolves have the ability to kind of harass back lines and really get up close and personal. Although, to be totally honest, the skin wolves are amazing. They can fight no matter what, perpetual and non-perpetual. So I'm not sure what they're saying, but they're not your normal infantry is basically what I'm trying to say. They're a bit squishy, but not too much. So that's your rat ogre. And if you are a warlord, you can ride one. So then you've got 2 pieces of artillery here. The plague claw catapult. This is kind of fits into the whole plague scheme. The leadership can be reduced, but it's not highly accurate. So there are not a lot of details on that. Or the warp lightning cannon. The warp lightning cannon is going to be an anti-large sniper weapon, which is actually fairly accurate to counter the plague claw catapult, and it's got a very long range. So I'm thinking kind of along the lines of a Luminar kind of sniping unit, or kind of like the sun beacon, whatever it's called, that we're fire prism or whatever that we're going to get. Fire prism's Eldar that we're going to get on the lizard men. So the warp lightning cannon is going to kind of fill that niche as well. But we do have the doom wheel, as we've seen, and a lot of people are very hyped up about that. I know I am. Nipples are hard just talking about it. That's going to have 3 missile attacks. So think of it as a chariot on steroids. And those missile attacks are basically going to be like warp lightning cannons all over it. More or less. That's kind of what they said. They didn't really go into the nitty-gritty on it. And although I know that's been covered in a lot of the other YouTubers' videos. I think that Party Elite actually went through a whole detailed explanation of that. He did for the Hell Pit Abomination. And I bring him up so much because I watched his video and it was awesome. But the Hell Pit Abomination that we're going to talk about, the last thing here, is an amalgamation of really everything Skaven. It's got a wheel on it, for Christ's sake. It's everything. So it's got the Too Horrible to Die ability, and that we're saying if it dies, a unit of Skaven slaves will come out from it. But it has regen and a rebirth mechanic a la the Phoenix. And what I was actually seeing from the actual what's it called, Reddit, is that the way that actually is going to work is that let me see here, user TDO God said when dropping below around 10% health, there's a 50% chance to regain health, and the remaining 50% chance to die outright. So it has an ability to just kind of pop its health right back up. So that is the Hell Pit Abomination. Kind of falls in line with what we're going to see with the Flameheart Phoenix from the High Elves. So I'm really excited to see these Skavens to actually play these Skaven and see them fleshed out in their entirety. There are a couple things we're missing here, so I'll go into them real quick. All of them are covered in the video at the end here, so if you are interested in hearing more about them, you can find all the goodies right after this video. We'll have a link to that Skaven Lore video. It is 2 hours long, but I have links to every single entry in there, so you can at least see what's going on. So the Warp Block Jezzails, which would have been like an AP long range rifle unit. Rattling Gunners, which would have been probably an AP short range organ gun in hands. Poison Wind Mortars. Just think mortar capability from your Empire soldier, but with the minus to leadership buff that a poison has, as we have seen that poison gets from all of these units. The Doom Flare, which is kind of it's kind of hard to describe. Take a look in the video after this, but you can kind of see it's like a weird looking device. But you've also got your giant rats, your wolf rats. Giant rats are swarms, just like there are swamp swarms, whatever they're called, for lizardmen. But you've got wolf rats, and you've got brood horrors as well, and which are these kind of like giant, basically think of it as like a baby Hell Pit Abomination, just this massive like Skaven brood, or I'm sorry, rat brooded beast thing ogre. It's all on all fours and just a monstrosity. It would be another mount. And then lastly, you've got the Vermin Lord, and the Vermin Lord might still be in the game. It might be a lord that's coming. It might be something that you can unlock via the abilities with the Vortex. So I haven't completely struck the Vermin Lord off yet. If you haven't seen what they look like, please check them out. They're really, really awesome. They're huge models, and they have all these horns. They look really It's definitely like the perfect synthesis between a demon and a rat, in like a not ratty way, but more in a demon way, and like a just bulging out the seams with muscles. Just steroids 2K17, really awesome. But that covers the entirety of the Skaven roster here, guys. If you do have any questions or anything like that, please let me know. Leave a comment. I'm more than happy to answer anything I can. Or if you saw something or heard something that I've missed, or from some of the videos of other YouTubers, like I was saying, please comment on them as well. I like to try and make these videos as concise as possible. But thanks for watching here today, guys. Have a good one and take care.